Hey everybody, what is going on? It is Aaron Trevino here, and we have Jon here as our guest, and he's got a lot to say. A real interesting guy. Works in the real estate business. And Jon, how's it going?
Good yourself.
Doing just fine. So tell us a bit about yourself.
So I'm Jon Kaplan. I've been in the real estate construction industry for a little better than 20 years now. I got two different companies, one being DIY Pros, which is a residential home building consulting industry, basically allowing homeowners to build and remodel their own houses with the guidance and assistance of professional contractors. The second one is Urban Building Services, which is the opposite side of it. We do the building design, inspection, and engineering of residential and commercial structures.
Absolutely. That's why I was interested because you had mentioned it was DIY, and a lot of people think you know if you're not very crafty, or if you don't know how to work with your hands much, you don't exactly think of DIY. So could you explain your business model a bit?
So what we do is not as much as we don't try to guide our customers as much as to physically swinging the hammers as it is managing the subcontractors properly, knowing the best expectations and how to manage them and what you should be getting. We have project management tools that we share them with them on online cloud-based platforms and also set them up with the construction schedule scans. We have local subcontractor and vendor bases we work with. So it's more of allowing people to manage the people to cut out that cost of that middleman who's typically charging 20 to 30% premium on top of the subcontractors.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that I hear from a lot of, not just friends or customers, just anyone, about that extra 20 or 30%, can make a big difference.
Correct.
So how did you first start in this business? Did you first start out in real estate in construction, or where did you start?
Started out in the construction industry back in high school, doing roofing for my high school shop teacher was actually a contractor in the summertime. We did a lot of roofs with him back then, got into it at that point and just kept going forward. Ventured into different points of construction. After a couple summers of roofing in 100 plus degree weather, I decided I didn't want to do that full time. Worked into the finished carpentry and cabinetry skills, and then ventured into framing and general contracting itself. Ended up in Florida back in 2000, South Florida area. Got into the general construction side there. Did that for 6 years and actually ended up going back towards the cabinetry and interior and millwork side. Had a pretty large cabinet shop, about 20,000 feet, with all the different facilities. And then from there, entered into the commercial millwork sector, doing work for companies like Starbucks, HMS Host, Burger King, all other different franchise Yum brands, and then sold that industry before moving out to Texas. Got back into the home building and remodeling industry. Realized out here with the lack of licensing wasn't a very fun endeavor. Uh, got into the building inspection, testing, and design side to help work around some of the issues with the lack of licensing out here in Texas. And then also ventured into the DIY side because a lot of clients are concerned about the cost of projects. So a little light went off in my head. It goes, okay, well, what if I could figure out a way of letting the client save money and guiding them along the process at the same time?
Absolutely. Yeah, you've really run the gamut in terms of, starting out when in high school working construction, to being in Florida and where you are now. That's awesome. So
Yeah.
what do you think the biggest difference is, transitioning in terms of the business you were doing in South Florida compared to here in Texas?
Well, South Florida is a highly regular, Florida itself is a highly regulated industry in the means of licensing. For my GC examination, there was a 16-hour proctored exam. If you're a specialty contractor, it's typically a minimum of 4-hour proctored exam. Uh, Out here, the only thing that's licensed is mechanical, electrical, plumbing, sprinklers, and septic contractors. So everyone else is the Wild West, and if they can get themselves a mode of transportation and a screwdriver, they call themselves a contractor. So that's the biggest issue. And there's no regulatory boards really tracking them down if they are messing up or stealing from people. Getting the county police departments to even do anything is tough. I mean, I have a $7,000 judgment against an electrician who stole money off of a project that we paid him. and you can't even collect it.
Ah, yeah, I can see how that's frustrating adjusting to, to Florida to here in that sense.
Hmm. Yeah, so that's the biggest difference. The construction, I've seen, building all over the place. We've seen every form of construction. I mean, building a house is building a house for the most part. Over there, it's all primarily concrete block structure, while over here it's wood frame. They do the concrete because of the hurricanes. The wood frame is a traditional building method that they use up and down, the entire U.S. So that side of it. But I'd say the biggest is the trades and the staffing makes a difference out here.
Sure. And I think in Florida, don't they use reinforced steel, don't they?
Yeah, so a lot of it's the reinforced concrete. So steel reinforced concrete. So they use CBS or concrete block structures with rebar reinforcements with filled concrete cells and concrete tie beams. And then on top of that, they'll do either a second floor and then more concrete, or a wood truss engineered system on top of that for the roof.
Okay, understood. Yeah, I've actually had a few friends. I'm not very familiar with the way that they build in Florida, but they kind of mentioned they use steel. How you mentioned with the concrete and how it was a bit different due to the hurricanes.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do some steel construction out here. We actually have one of our DIY customers in Apache Shores, which is just outside of Lakeway, who did a steel skeleton structure because it's a 4-story house hanging off the side of a mountain. So they had to do a steel slab below, or a concrete slab below, but only partially, and then have a cantilever steel I-beams and members that are spanning, I think, 32 feet at the longest spans, just for the structural support of the property.
Wow. How about that?
Yeah.
That's a lot of planning.
Yeah. Yes, it is.
So is that mostly, the project you just described in Lakeway? Is that most of your projects would kind of look like that? Or, could you describe a bit of the current projects you have or other projects you're looking to do?
Oh, we have a major variant in projects, everything from kitchen and bathroom remodels. One of our clients in Westlake just put 1,000 square foot addition and remodeled their old master bedroom into a guest suite and office. Several new builds in the greater Austin area. We have some out west in Burnett County. And then we have people doing barndominiums. We have people doing Airbnb cottage packages, renovation projects. It's just a massive mixture of types of projects. Going forward, we're pretty much doing the exact same model. And we're actually looking at, right now, we're setting development plans to actually franchise the model across the country to expand the operations.
Beautiful. Terrific. So when are you looking to roll that out? Probably sometime next year?
Correct. Yeah. So right now we're developing the business plans and models. Then we got to do the VC funding process, develop all the paperwork, the contracts. So it'll be sometime early next year before it actually starts.
Wow. How about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, I would imagine that takes it, it's especially with everything that's been going on with the economy and,
Mm-hmm.
um, I'm sure there's a lot of moving pieces there.
Well, it's actually interesting because with the COVID, we've actually gotten more calls because people are home, want to do projects, and want to figure out how to do it themselves also to save money. And we also have camera systems that we integrate into these projects so we can actually see what they're doing when they want us to. We even have camera systems where they could set it up in space, a lot of times in kitchens or bathrooms, and we could remote operate it from our computer. It has a laser pointer on it. So we could sit there and say, hey, you see that electrical box over there? It's too low, too high. We need to do different wiring systems. So we could actually tell them what we're doing remotely as to what they need to correct and change.
Wow. How about that? So how would you, in terms of the personnel that you have, what do you have a large percentage that strictly work from home and then other people out in the field, or how does that work?
It's a lot of it's fields. So we're not just saying, okay, hey, we're going to hire you onto the project. Good luck. We'll be in our office waiting for you. We actually, literally hold their hands on the job sites, and we have weekly site meetings and give them the process and procedures as to what they need to follow. So really the big difference between our model and a GC model is the owners act as their site superintendent. But that, allowing them to save 15 to 20% being a site supervisor means a lot for them. And I find that they expedite their projects quicker because that's their number one item that they're worried about. When you hire a traditional GC platform, you have, GC may have 15 different projects and they're spreading their time, you know, as much as they can, but they may not get to your job that week.
Yeah.
So you see a lot of that.
Sure, absolutely. That's what I thought was interesting as well, because it seems like yours is, you know, the business model is really tailored to where, they can have that, you can have, that focus on your client, as opposed to a GC who's at 15 different projects.
Correct. Correct. And like when we do this weekly site meetings, we actually go through, we have a Gantt chart with all the processes of the construction, and we also update it, make any changes need to be, and then give step-by-step details of what they need to look out for in the upcoming week, upcoming, month, and then the future plan, just so they're not having any issues of, oh, they're missing this, they need that, they didn't know about these components. We need to verify scheduling, we need to make sure that these subcontractors are in line. Because when you're doing a house, if it's a 6-month build, when you're doing the initial contracts and you're selecting your subs, 4 months later, you may say, hey, I wanted to use ABC installation, let me give them a call. And the next thing you know, they're like, oh, we're booked out 3 months on a massive subdivision. So, you need to make sure you get your next guy in line. That's also why we tell people, it's like, when you're selecting bids, don't always pick your lowest bid. I'm not saying you got to pick the highest bid, but find out which one's the biggest grouping of price. So God forbid that guy's not available, the next guy's still within your budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially for people that are just starting out. It can definitely be difficult to kind of strike that happy medium. It can be tempting to go with the guy who gives you the lowest bid, and then, kind of balking at the one that gives you the higher one. So.
Mm-hmm. Correct. And the crazy thing is, especially in this market, I find the more competent guys have a tendency of being that middle price market, while the guys who don't know what they're doing, they're usually the extreme cheapest or the most expensive, because they don't actually know what they're bidding or how to bid it. And the guys you find, like I always tell people, 3, 4 at the most, see what your price ranges come in at. If you start to get some crazy spreads, then invite another guy in there. But I always find with our sub base that we typically use, I explain to them, like, I could tell you that these guys here are going to be your best price to value ratio. If you want to get some additional bids, you're more than welcome. But historically, these guys are always the best.
Sure, absolutely. So if you were, if there's someone out there that's on the hunt for, some good subs, and maybe they're new to the area or just new to the industry, where do they even start?
So depending on the trade, I always tell people. So when I did the work for Starbucks, we actually built stores up and down the Eastern Seaboard. So we'd be in new states, new markets all the time. So if you're looking for like your mechanical, electrical, and plumbing guys, go to the supply houses. And the supply houses will never give you references, but if you walk in there and say, hey, who's been buying here for a long time and pays their bills, they'll tell you that information. And if they've been working there for 10 years and always pay their bills, they're doing something right. Same thing with your lumber yards. If you go to a lumber yard and say, hey, I'm looking for a good carpenter to do this type of work, they'll typically have a list of guys, or they'll know, hey, this guy's been buying here for a long time also. Anything, it goes the same for any trade. You go to plumbing, paint supply stores, tile shops, any of those places will have typically a good list of suppliers. You also have all the online databases now, like your Yelp reviews, your Facebook sites. The digital market area is a great place. I'd stay away from any of the ones that actually charge the contractors, because those are lead generation sites like who's the big one? Service Magic, not Service Magic. Home Advisor. They charge the contractors for the quotes or for the leads, and then you get bombarded with contractor after contractor after contractor. And if they're having to buy out leads like that, they're doing something wrong. If they're getting word of mouth referrals, they're doing something right.
Yep. That's right. It almost sounds like that old adage, less is more.
Correct.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know that about, you said it was Home Advisor, right?
Correct.
I didn't know that about the leads.
Yeah. So Home Advisor used to be Service Magic. So it was Service Magic for many years. Then they got in a lot of trouble because they were, they used to market and say, oh, we're going to sell the leads to 3 people. Then they got busted selling it to multiple people, like 10. So they ended up changing that name to Home Advisor, and now they just got busted doing it again. So who knows what they're going to do?
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that definitely helps because I know it can be, especially for people that are just starting out, it can be a bit frustrating just trying to find, okay, well, so and so gave me this bid, and then there's this bid, and like anything, you can find the deals, which are obviously a big part of of your legwork, but part of it is just building a good team.
Yeah, and the qualifying the bids is a big item too. Like for example, for drywall, there's multiple levels of finish on drywall. So someone could come in there and say, "Hey, I'm charging you $10,000 to drywall this house." It's like, well, what kind of finish are you doing? Oh, I'm going to do an orange peel finish. Okay, well, that's what a lot of houses have. Then you may get another quote for 14,000, but he may be doing a level 4, which is a smooth coat finish, or another, he may be doing a level 5, which is 100% floated. So you also got to be able to verify what you're getting for those prices, and you want to dictate the level finish on there, because if there's ever any dispute, you can go back, like on drywall, you go back to USG standards, and it specifies what is be considered a 2, 3, 4, 5 finish. So in this case, there's never a dispute on the, oh, I thought it was going to be this. Well, it actually dictates what it is.
Okay, could you explain the finishes, the 2 through 5, just I guess in terms of grading?
Yeah, so if you go through level 5 as your highest end, so they're going to take, or actually we should probably go backwards because it kind of explain the process. A level 2 is going to be, they're going to go ahead and put the drywall up and put one coat of tape and mud on top of it, just like you see in a garage, where it's just going to look nasty. You're not going to want it inside of your house, but it's more for utility rooms. A level 3 is they're going to do the tape coat, first coat of mud and second coat of mud. And then on top of that, they're going to spray an orange peel finish, which orange peel or knockdown. The orange peel is that slight texture that actually looks just like the peel of an orange on the outside of it. And different levels of density, because some of them use a very heavy orange peel, some people do a very light orange peel. Some people use a knockdown finish, also known as a California drag, where they spray these big globs of joint compound on your wall, and they have these really wide, flat trowels that they knock over the top of it to make it into a flatter profile, and they call that a knockdown texture. Then your level 4 is going to be when they do the drywall process, where they do a fourth layer coat of the mud on top of it. So this way, you should have a pretty smooth coat of drywall across your entire house. That's what you see in most of your commercial buildings. Then your level 5 is they take that and they actually skim every wall 100% with a layer of joint compound. So everything's gonna be fully smooth, fully clean, fully matching. So this way, when you actually put your paint on there, you don't have any differentials of paint sheen, because some of it's over joint compound, some of it's over the paperboard.
Oh, so it's entirely uniform.
Correct.
Absolutely. Yeah, I never thought about that, about it being different, the garage to the interior.
Hmm. Yeah, and you'll even see, like in commercial buildings, like a firewall. They'll do, like, I mean, they'll even just do a level 1 with just your tape coat. It's just enough on there to keep fire from penetrating through. But they really do that because that tape ends up falling off over time because there's not enough protection on it, and then your fire marshal makes you go back and do it again.
Yeah, and that's the last thing, an investor wants is, to complete the project and then, oh, you have a little issue here.
Correct. Yeah, that's correct. And the cost between the two of them is so minimal; it's almost non-existent.
What do you think the cost differential would be?
Between a 1 and a 2,
Yep.
uh, I mean, if you figure per square foot, or per square feet, I think they charge like 3 cents.
Okay. No
It's like a
brainer.
dollar a board, because they do it at the same time. When they put the tape up there, they they run the trowel across at the same time. So
Okay.
it's not like they're really spending that much extra time on there. And especially if they're going ahead and if they're bringing like banjos and box trowels up there, it's even quicker, because they're just going to run the banjo right over the top of it and the box trowel right behind it.
Could you explain the banjo?
Banjo's basically it's a silver box. You see them at Home Depot, and it's kind of triangular shaped. On one end, they have the roll of tape inside of it, and you actually put joint compound inside the banjo. So you pull the tape through it, and it puts the mud on the tape, so you can stick it right to the wall. So this way, you're not going through and having to put mud on the wall and put the tape up to it, and then smoothing that out. And then a box taper is another device that you fill up with joint compound. It looks like a box about 12 inches tall, and you put joint compound, and you actually push it right up against the wall, and you run it horizontally along the seam, and it puts all the mud on the wall smooth for you ahead of time.
Wow, that sounds a lot more convenient.
Well, if you're a production drywall company, you're going to have it. I mean, the tool's about $2,000, but if you could have a crew of 3 guys tape out an entire house in a couple days, it makes us money back on the first job.
Yeah, I would imagine. Is that normally what it takes, just a crew of 3 guys to operate that one?
Well, you usually have 3 guys if you have a box taping crew or basically a production crew. If you're doing a lot of hand finishing, I've seen them 5, 6, 7 guys to do it just
Okay.
as quick. Yeah.
Yeah, because I've gotten a lot of questions about, it's one thing to even get a team together, and then people also ask, okay, well, I'm starting to form this small team. How big is too big? How small is too small? How many people do I need just to get the job done and get it finished?
Well, there's like any crew, any team, there's a point where you have too many and a point that's not enough. It depends on what tools you have, what technology you have, and what are you doing. For example, when I had the commercial millwork shop, we had about 35 guys inside the shop. When we had 35 guys with basic equipment, we're producing about $2.5 million a year in commercial millwork. When I started bringing some top technology, automatic edge banders, CNC routers, vertical panel saws, we went up to about $10 million with the same guys.
Wow, how about that?
Yeah. So it's the technology that makes a difference. It's the same thing like AutoCAD, when we're drafting plans. It used to take, several days by hand to draw an entire house set of plans. I could do in a day now with the technology.
Yeah, plans are already taking long enough in Houston. We're
Yeah.
dealing with those.
Yeah. And it's really more backlog than anything. The actual time to do it is not that much. It's the creative process and going back and forth between the different disciplines and the owners.
Sure, absolutely. No, it's really interesting to think about, technologically speaking, how far the real estate industry has come and how much it will change in the future.
Hmm.
So what do you, in terms of, technological changes, what do you think is next for us?
On the real estate sales side, the virtual walkthroughs are becoming bigger and bigger now, especially with the whole COVID situation. And the technology is coming less and less expensive. Like a Matterport camera is what most companies are using. We actually have one for our as-built software. And it's the same camera, it's just a different software integration, or someone could do an entire walkthrough of a house. So you could sit there and say, hey, I want to walk these 10 houses tonight while everybody else is sleeping. And then you can reach out to your realtor and say, hey, I've walked these 10 houses. I want to actually see these 2 in person. So it's going to cut down a lot of your travel and time wasted, wandering through different people's houses. Uh, you know, Going forward, the prices are always going to vary. Prices are always going to go up just with inflation and land costs. If you're going outside of major cities, things are obviously more stable because there's a lot more land available. It's going to be a matter of what you want and where you want, just like real estate. It's location, location, location. Your lakefront is going to skyrocket, and it already is because most of the lakes are taken up. Your suburban areas, they're also increasing steadily, but not as drastic as your lakefronts. I see houses are actually being designed smaller now because your tax costs, when your cost of your house goes up, your taxes go up just as much with it. So, for example, my house in Lakeway, when I bought it 5 years ago, was $260,000. The same model down the street just sold for $480,000. In 5 years, the exact same house. So your taxes are going to go up considerably. Now, you take that same house and you sit there and say, okay, I have a 5,000 square foot house when mine's only 2, so you're basically valued at, $600,000, 2% tax. You're spending $6,000 a year on property taxes. And you sit there and go, do I need 5,000 feet or can I do with 3,000 feet? You could do with 3,000 feet.
Yeah.
So I see houses are getting smaller, but there's doing better design and better processes and flows inside of them. You're always going to have the jumbo mansions, but the general public, they're going smaller. We have one client we're working with on the owner's representation side called Art Village Development, and he's actually designing a lot of these small, high efficiency houses because he is European, he's from Ukraine, and they have much smaller houses over there. So he's taken that use structure, bringing it here, and designing more American styled houses with the European flair to them, but smaller at a better price point and still getting your efficiencies out of the house.
That seems to be the future. It's kind of hard to tell because it almost seems like there's a bunch of different trends. I've heard of people wanting to leave inner city Houston or inner city San Antonio, Austin to move out to a suburb or to a rural area. Almost even revitalizing rural areas as well.
Hmm.
So it's interesting to see. I'm not even sure where we'll end up.
Yeah, so I mean, I see it. It's a lot of it's age based for the most part, from what I've seen. You get the younger crowd wants to be inside the city where it's hip, cool, and fun. When the babies start coming out, they want to get out of the city, and go back into the rural areas. When the babies get out of the house, and they get a little older, then they said, like, I'm gonna go a little farther out, a little more rural, get some land, enjoy life a little bit more. And then once they hit, typically a little older point, and usually in their late 50s, early 60s, you go, what? I think I want to go back into the city so I can enjoy life while I can. Or they do the opposite and they go, I want to get really far out there so no one ever looks at me again.
Yep, that really runs the gamut there.
Yeah. And those are the trends that we have a tendency of seeing out there. It also depends on what your business model is and what you do. I have another client that we did work for in downtown Austin, where he's got 3 kids, but his business requires him to be, within 5 minutes of downtown. He owns a large commercial property management firm, and he has to physically, if something goes awry in one of these high rises, he needs to be there to oversee it, or he can't be an hour away.
Yep, that's right. No, it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen in terms of growth. We're moving in so many different directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then one of the markets we're working with another developer on is modular construction, to really keep construction costs down and quality control up. So there's a few companies out there, nothing in the Texas area. There are one company in California and one company in North Carolina, where we're working on designing and engineering houses where they actually come out as a giant kit, where one house will show up on two 53-foot trucks, and we could have the entire house from concrete slab to roof in 3 days. And
Wow.
inside of that would be all of we'd have all of the uh, framing, insulation, windows, electrical, and plumbing would be inside of them. Now, obviously, there's a lot more build time in the factory, but your field times cut down a lot shorter. But your factory conditions also show and allow for more precision manufacturing, precision construction versus the field.
Absolutely. That's something that frankly I don't even think I'd ever really paid attention to those sort of homes until a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like they're popping up everywhere.
Yeah, no, they are getting more. I mean, they're not big homes typically. The ones we're looking at developing, they have a 1,200, 1,500, and 1,800 square foot model. They're definitely price point homes, but the actual construction quality is phenomenal. It's not like a mobile home on wheels. It's a site built house. And these are actually the company that we're looking at doing these is same company that builds a lot of modular houses for windblown islands. So they use a lot of this technology in the Caribbean because they have to withstand 200-mile-an-hour winds.
Ah, very good. No, that was it kind of seems like that's a common rebuttal from someone, that's kind of on the fence. They're not exactly sure. They'll say, okay, well, I pay a cheaper price, but I also sacrifice quality.
No, it's actually they're getting a better quality because a lot of these houses are actually computerized fabrication. So every piece is coming off of a computerized fabrication line. Everything's actually set where all the framing goes into specialized notches, all the insulation slides in it and foam, all the electrical, all the plumbing, everything's precision design. They're just spending countless hours on the original engineering side, and then the machinery just pops it all through much quicker.
Wow, how about that?
Yeah, but same thing. You're doing production houses, not custom homes. The cost of a custom home will be astronomical in this manner. Their point of savings is about 26 houses. So after 26 homes, they're making they can justify the cost. Before that, it'll cost them more.
Sounds like it. What do you think of do you think that 3D printing has a place in the construction industry?
I've seen, so there's companies in Austin that have been doing it on smaller houses. There's companies in China that have been doing it on all sorts of avenues. Uh, there will be a justification for it, but I don't think it's going to be mainstream. I think it's going to be like, oh, I have a cool 3D printed home, but you're not going to get the, the quality, the qualities that you want. I mean, they're basically slurping out a mortar mix in a weird pattern, around a house. Your interior finishes aren't going to be what you want. Your exterior finishes aren't going to be what you want until they can really set the standard to it. It's almost like inject a wood fiber versus a mortar mix. You're not going to really get what you want. Now, with that said, if you go into, other markets, I've seen some stuff going to the Caribbean that they don't have windows, they don't have air conditioning, they have a solid concrete structure, and the people are ecstatic because it's great, because it withstands those hurricanes. They have a relatively constant wind gust out there, and temperature variations between 65 and 78 degrees. So they're used to not having air conditioning, and they have some wood shutters for the windows. So for them, that's great. I don't see the typical American want to go, hey, I have this house that's, kind of funky and weird, but it's not that great looking inside, but it's cool. Yeah. I just don't see that, at this time until they could update some of the technologies to inject, more of a wood fiber product versus a cementatious product. And the same thing is kind of like the container homes. People are like, oh, I want to do a container home. It's like, well, that's great. Do you know it's going to be more expensive to do a container home than a traditional home? They go, oh, no, it's not. I'm like, well, let's run the actual numbers. It is. Because by the time you take a steel shipping container and insulate it to meet, IRC guidelines, and your, container outside is 8 feet, so everything's going to be about, 7.5 feet internally, you're not going to be happy with what you have, as a container home. Now there's a couple container companies out there making 10-foot wide ones to make it a little different. But a lot of the container homes we've been designing now are actually designing standard homes and then cladding it to look like a container. But there are companies out there, I keep going back to, the Caribbean and other areas where it's like when you have disaster housing or very basic housing, and they use containers and make it work because it's better than anything they've ever had. So there is a use for it. There's a gentleman down in Dripping Springs who builds hunting and fishing cabins out of containers, because you could take a 20-foot container, build a really cool hunting or fishing cabin, dump it in the woods, and not care. Because when you're gone, you close up the steel doors, and you're not gonna show up one day with a bear sitting on your couch, because they're not gonna be able to get in.
Yeah. Wow. Now that's going to be the future. That's really going to take off.
Yeah, I mean, he does about, I last I spoke with him, he's been doing about I think about 30 a year.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, people like the fact that you could, you figure, I mean, I don't know if you're a hunter, but if you have a hunting lease, you want to have a place to stay. And the fact that you can literally just move this cabin around as you please, and it's waterproof, and you don't have to worry about, bugs and critters being in there, it's perfect.
Absolutely. Wow. It's getting me excited for hunting season now, and I don't even have a container. That's neat though. I didn't know about that.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually did one hunting container for a client. He wanted. We actually put the container vertical, so it's the entire place. So the bottom level is the kitchen and bathroom. The middle level is the little living area. The top level has bunk beds, and there's a rooftop deck that you go on top of 20 feet in the air with a railing, and that's where he has his hunting stand.
Oh wow. Huh.
So he's 20 feet up in the air.
I'll have to look that up and put a link in the description if I can find it. That's pretty neat.
It's on a private residence down in Johnson City. You ain't gonna find it.
Oh man.
Yep. We actually did one just like that though for there used to be a TV show, or they had one season, it was a TV show called You Can't Make That Into a House. Look up the episode for Bison Shed, and we did a vertical container on that one also.
Okay, I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah.
I won't spoil it here, but it sounds pretty neat.
Yeah.
But Yeah, that's wow. I'm kind of going in a bunch of different directions, just thinking about how construction will change. Because I know that, I read a few articles a few years ago about 3D printing, and really I kind of took um, a similar stance to you. Is that some people will do it, but it won't be the mainstream.
Yeah, I mean, there's always everybody's trying to hedge the newest, latest, and greatest building technology. So there's the 3D printing, then there's modularized panel systems. Before all that, there were SIP systems, which are structural insulated panels, which are framing, sheathing, and foam insulation on the inside of it. There's also been a lot of companies as of late that came out with prefabricated steel house kits, where the machine would push out all the parts and they'd be labeled, and all the steel track, the top and bottom tracks would have holes and positions for it already, and all the studs would slide into them. You could screw it together and erect the house yourself. Those do very well when steel costs are low, but when steel costs go up, all those companies go out of business. They had, then people says, oh, to save lumber, let's use finger jointed lumber so we can produce a straighter stud and use all of our off scraps and millings, which, in theory, they work great. But when the production line doesn't put the right amount of glue on those same, finger jointed studs, then they start cracking and falling apart. You also can't use those as horizontal supports because they'll shear off the snaps, and you have to ask a framer to use that stud here but not there. While traditional studs they can use as they please. You also have now thermally broken studs, where they're taking 2x3s instead of a traditional 2x4. They're taking two 2x3s, putting them together with a foam core between the two of them. So what that does is the heat from the outside doesn't radiate and transfer all the way through the inside on the stud, because wood studs, just transmit heat through crazy. If you take a thermal imaging camera and you put it outside on an outside wall of a house, if you're on the inside of the house, pointing towards the outside of the house, you can actually see where all the stud bays are just because of the thermal lines. But if you have those thermally broken studs, you don't see that. But once again, you have more labor and costs involved in those studs. And if that foam's not installed properly on those studs, you end up with two 2x3s instead of a 2x6.
Wow, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah. No, there's, I mean, then you have ICF concrete blocks, which are giant foam block kits to build your house. You pour concrete inside of them. I mean, there's anything and everything people try to come up with creative and say, oh, this is the newest, latest, and greatest and best thing, until they realize, everything has its inherent problems. So people always just go back to what can they frame or what can they build that's a traditional method that's time proven, that meets our building codes.
Yeah, it kind of seems like that's the name of the game. I know we've talked a lot about a lot of the really intricate parts, and kind of the future technologically speaking with construction and real estate. But I mean, if you were just to give a few kind of little pointers to someone who's looking to build something, where should they start?
So, I mean, depending on what you're trying to build, if you're sitting to say, I want to build a house, obviously the first thing to do is you got to have your land. Before you buy land, you actually want to make sure that that land will suit what you want to put there. So you go out and buy land, and then the HOA may have restrictions on what you could build. The city may have restrictions of what you could build, and there may be easements on the property where you can't even build anything. I've had clients who've bought property, and I have to tell them, it's like, well, you have easements all through this property. You can't even build a house on this thing. And then they have that blank stare on their face, like, oh my God, I paid $100,000 for a piece of dirt I can't use, and now I know this information, so I can't not disclose it when I go to buy the property.
Yeah.
But your biggest thing is going to be is, no matter what you try to build, if you contact a architect or designer or an engineer, and you try to work with them on the going forward phases, all of those trades don't have any advantage to a more expensive cost of construction or more expensive cost of build. They're going to tell you what you can and cannot build ahead of time. I know a lot of people try to not to use a designer to look at it as an added cost, but in reality, those designers and architects and engineers also act as a owner's representative to make sure the contractor is doing what they're supposed to do. And for example, if a contractor comes back and says, oh, that beam's no good, and it's going to cost you $3,000 to replace it, well, that call actually belongs to the engineer, not the contractor. an engineer come out and goes, there's nothing wrong with that beam. He just doesn't know what he's looking at. So you could have spent $3,000 when you actually didn't have to.
Yep.
So the biggest thing to start any project is, your research, and at least coming out and bringing out a design professional or another professional consultant to look at it that, doesn't have skin in the game of trying to charge you as much money as possible for a project for their bottom line.
Sure. So just, I mean, even, we kind of mentioned about building that good team of subs who can go in and do the work and get it done. But, how do you find those engineers, those designers, those architects?
A lot of them are, once again, word of mouth. But most of your engineers, designers, and architects, depending on your state regulations, but most states actually regulate them. So you go to state websites, so like in the state of Texas, you got the Professional Board of Engineers in the state of Texas. You got the American Institute of Architecture, who governs your architects and designers. So that's a good spot. Next thing is, if you have any friends who've recently remodeled or bought or, built a house, they may have some references. Social media is a good way to, reach out and say, hey, friends, I'm looking at doing this project. Anyone have a reference for an architect or designer on this project? And they may come up and say, oh yeah, you so-and-so, they did a great job. But if any trade, any sub, anything at all, even an architect, if they say, do you have references? Say, yes, great. I'll give you their phone number. It's like, no, I want to go look at it, because anyone can give you the phone number of their cousin. But cousin Fred's not going to be so interested in you coming over their house. So that's the big one, is I want to go look at it versus just, take my word for it. This guy's legitimate.
Yep, absolutely. So in terms of, what do you think would be, when you're building, maybe some common pitfalls that people generally have, or maybe some things to try to avoid?
The budgeting is number one pitfall. Everybody thinks they could build it for $100 when it costs 300. A real schedule of costs is the biggest thing. Like I have a form we use for both our DIY and our urban markets that, it's 1,000-line spreadsheet. Now, of those 1,000 lines, an average project uses about 350 to 370 of them. But those lines, you go down, when you're actually looking at the cost factors, everything, they'll jog your memory as to what they are. There's some lines on there I've never used ever, but they're on there just in case. Because, for example, one of them we haven't ever used is we haven't had to bring in our own electrical transformers from the public utilities. But I have friends who've had when they're doing massive subdivisions. But on a standard residential house, you're not going to have that. So the budget is your number one. And even bringing in a third-party consultant is not a bad idea on doing that. So that if your contractor provides you with a budget, they always call it's a budget, not a quote. So how do you know it's actually going to work? So in addition to your budget, you also want to make sure you have design specifications. So, when they sit and say, oh, you have $1,000 for plumbing fixtures. Okay, great. Is that plumbing fixtures for what? You could spend $1,000 on a kitchen sink and faucet if you wanted to. You could spend $1,000 on a single bathroom vanity faucet if you wanted to. You want to itemize and quantify every single item. And yes, it's a lot of paperwork in the very beginning, but it'll save you tens of thousands of dollars in the end.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's important to have those, basically just those backstops, how you talked about having that good designer to tell you, the contractor's going to charge you $3,000 for this when, you don't need it. Terrific advice. Yeah, John, is there anything else that you haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
I think we got most of it down. I mean, it's, the, on the construction side, I mean, the other big misconception I see is construction finance. I've had a few clients who go, I want to remodel this house, and then if I need money later, I can get it. And reality wise, if you're building a house or remodeling a house, it's almost impossible to get a loan for construction once it's already started. They want to be the first person to provide you the first lien rate. The few times I've actually seen people in that situation, they've had to stop construction for 30 to 60 days to make sure no liens actually pop up before a bank would even talk to them. So in the beginning, you need to make sure you have your budget and your finance under control. I've had some clients where they even get a home equity line of credit, in place, but they never actually used it. So they spent a few $100s for an insurance policy to make sure they have it. Your other thing is make sure your contractor has his liability insurance. See if you need a builder's risk policy. If you're building new construction, you absolutely do. And what that policy is anything that's not covered by your general liability covers by your builder's risk. So if your house gets struck by lightning, burns to the ground, builder's risk pays you everything you paid into it to date for cost, including removal of the old property. But the one thing to know is general liability does not cover bad workmanship. If a tile guy installs the floor and it looks really bad, general liability does not cover that. There are some E&O policies that will do that, but they're very few and far between out there. Deposits, you don't want to be giving out huge deposits because people will disappear with your money, and you pay them, based on work performed and work completed, not, big chunks up front and hope they come back later.
Yep, absolutely. That should be written on billboards across the state.
I know. We see a lot of it. We do a lot of defective construction claims, and we run out to a lot of projects where contractors are halfway through, $100,000 over budget, and things are falling down already. And the owners are just sitting there like, oh my God, what do I do at this point?
Yep, that's a tough situation.
It is.
But yeah, John, so where can maybe someone's listening to this right now. It's been real thought provoking. I mean, where do we find you? Where can we
for the DIY program is www.diypros.com. And then our building inspection, design, and engineering is ubstx.com, or is basically Urban Building Services of Texas.
Okay.
And, phone number is 512-920-3439.
Absolutely. All right, John. Well, that was, again, that was real thought provoking. I really enjoyed that conversation. That was great.
I appreciate that.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me on.